Hello everyone, and welcome to the 24th video of the TypeScript Game Engine tutorial series. Today we're going to be adding to our gameplay mechanics and give us something to actually dodge in between. And we're also going to fix some bugs that I've noticed along the way. Now, I know it's been a bit since I released the last video, and that's just because sometimes real life tends to sort of throw a lot of things at you, and things come up and things get in the way. And sometimes that just happens, so I do apologize for the lack of videos lately, but I do want to go ahead and tie this up. So there's going to be one more, maybe two more videos after this, just to tie this game up. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. So we left off with the ability to be able to flap our duck here, and if he hits the ground, he dies. And that is pretty much where we're at. So what we need to do is a couple of things to begin. So the first thing is we've only got a couple of assets in here, and we need to actually add some more assets. So I've got some additional assets here, and if you pull down the latest version of the repository from GitHub, you will get these assets along with that. Okay, so basically what we have here is a background image, just to make things look a little bit nicer. We have the end of our pipes, and we have the middle of our pipes, and of course we have the duck and the grass as we had before. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is go into zones and open up our test zone, and I already actually have this open. And we need to make some modifications to this first for all the things that we're going to add to this. So I want to start by adding what we need here, and then we will actually add our components and behaviors after that as we need them. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a background object. And that needs to be actually first in the list so that render is behind everything else in the scene. So we're just going to call this BG. And we're going to set up a transform. And we want a position. Okay. And the X value is going to be 0. Now technically it defaults to this, but I'm putting it here just to be explicit. And the Y value is going to be 372. And again, these are numbers that I've sort of worked out ahead of time. I know what they should be just to make sure that they line up correctly on the screen. You can always play with these numbers if you want, just to see what kind of effect it has, but I know that these numbers for the most part are good. Okay. So the next thing we need is to define our components collection. So components, and oops, that needs to be an array. And in our components, geez, I can't type today either, it seems. Okay, so our first component is going to be a background component. So this is basically going to be a sprite component. I'm also going to call this BG. Let's call this BG sprite, just to be explicit. And the type is going to be sprite. Okay. The material name is going to be BG. The width is going to be 320, and the height is going to be 86, and that's just the height of the image that we're going to be using here. Okay, and we don't have any behaviors now, but I'm going to go ahead and just add an empty array here just in case we need it in the future. Great. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to add our pipes. And I'm going to go ahead and add these also in front of the duck so that they render behind. That way if we hit one of them, the pipe doesn't appear on the duck, the duck appears over top of the pipe. So I'm going to create a new object here. Okay, so its name is going to be pipe1. It's also going to have a transform. I'm actually just going to copy this section here and paste it here. Its transform x is going to be 200, and its y is going to be 0. Alright, and for components, it's actually not going to have any components at this level, so I'm going to leave that empty. Behaviors, however, we're going to add one. So this is going to be named pipe1 scroller, and it's going to be type scroll. Now this is obviously going to be a new component that we're going to create, but I just want to go ahead and get this configured ahead of time. Okay, so it takes a property called velocity, and that's a vector 2, and so we want to define that as having x with negative 120. This means it's going to scroll or move to the left, and y is going to be 0. Okay. We're also going to define a min position, and that is also a vector 2. So it's going to have an x, which is going to be negative 50, and a y, which is 0. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a bit. We also are going to define a reset position. This is also a vector 2. So it's going to have an x of 550. Oops. And a y of 0. Okay, and a couple more things. We need a reset message, which is going to be game underscore reset. And then we're going to need a stop message, and that is going to be player underscore died. And finally, we're going to need a start message, and that is going to be player underscore reset. Okay, more of this will make sense as we develop the component, so I'm going to kind of skip over the explanation for now, but I think just kind of reading this, you can kind of figure out what it's going to do. Alright, the next thing that I want to do is create a children array. Okay, and this is actually going to house 2 children each. It's going to house the end of the pipe, and it's going to house the beginning of the pipe. Actually, it's going to define one of each of those for the top and the bottom. So, bear with me here. This is going to be a lot of configuration typing out, but once we're done, I think it'll make more sense. And its name is going to be pipe1 underscore top, and it's going to have a transform. Within that, we're going to set the position, and the x is going to be 0, and the y is going to be 150. So 150 from the top of the screen. Okay, and then we're going to have to define some components. And in there, we're going to make one that's just a sprite, and I'm actually just going to paste some code in here because you guys don't necessarily need to watch me type all of this. So basically this is a sprite component for the end of the top with material end and width of 48 and a height of negative 28. So the height is negative, which means that the sprite will actually get flipped in the up direction. Alright. The next component is going to be called pipe1 collision, and then we're going to say underscore and neg, just for to stand for negative. Okay, and its type is going to be collision. Okay, and the shape is going to be of type rectangle, and it's going to have a width of 48, and as you may have guessed, a height of negative 28. Okay, and then just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to put an empty behaviors array in here just in case we need it. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to make a copy of this object, and I'm going to make the sort of middle section that's going to be tiled. So I'm going to call this pipe1, we'll call this middle top. And the transform, the position is going to be, the x position is going to be 2, and the y is going to be negative 178. Okay, and that's just so that it extends sort of off the screen. Okay, and the name of our component is going to be, we'll call this middle top. Its type is still going to be sprite. Material name is going to be middle. Its width is going to be 44 because it's a little bit thinner than the end, and the height is going to be 300. Okay, and we're going to change the name of this collision to pipe1 collision underscore middle underscore top. And the width is going to be 44, and the height is going to be 300 to match the sprite. And just like before, we're going to have an empty behaviors array. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy both of these because we need one more set of these for the bottom pipe. So I'm actually just going to paste that in here, and I'm going to call this pipe1 underscore bottom. The transform on this is going to be 0 to 50. The component is going to be called end bottom. The width is 48. The height is positive 28. The collision is just going to be pipe1 collision end. It's going to be a rectangle. It's going to have a width of 48 and a height of negative 28. Okay, and finally we have the pipe1 middle, and its position is going to be 2, and then its y is going to be 274, and then its component, the first one's going to be named middle bottom. The material name is still going to remain middle. The width is 44. The height is still 300. And then pipe collision middle top is going to be called bottom. And everything else here should remain the same. So this is what we need to create one pipe. Now, I do understand that This is quite verbose in terms of how much configuration settings are actually needed for one of these pipes. And this may be something that we optimize later, but for now, I'm going to keep it as is. So now what we need to do is copy this pipe, this whole pipe object. And we need 2 copies of it. So I'm going to paste 1 copy, rename this to pipe 2, and rename this to pipe 2 scroller. And all we have to do for this is change just a couple of properties. So velocity can stay the same, min position can stay the same, and reset position can stay the same. Actually, I don't think we have to change anything else except for the names. Yeah, we should be good. Okay. So I'll paste 1 more copy of that, and I'll call this pipe 3, and pipe 3 scroller. And you know what? I forgot something actually. So in pipe 2, its position actually needs to be 400. And then back down here in pipe 3, its position needs to be 600. And that should be all we have to do. Okay, so just to make this document a little easier to scroll through, I'm actually going to collapse these pipes. Let's see. Okay. Alright, so the next thing is the ground, which actually needs to be moved in front of the duck. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the duck and I'm going to move him to the end. Okay. And so I've got ground, and right now we have scale. We have this scale 1:1 here. That's the default, so I'm going to remove that just to kind of clean things up a little bit. The next thing that we need to do is we actually need to add a behavior to our ground object. So I'm going to call this name ground scroller, and it's also going to be of type scroll, and we're going to set velocity same as before, so x -120, y is 0. We're going to set min position so the x is going to be -330 and the y is going to be 0. Okay, and we're going to set reset position, and x is going to be 330, y is going to be 458, and then reset message game_reset, and stop message player_died, start message player_reset. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we actually need a second one of these ground objects. So I'm just going to take this whole thing, duplicate it, and we're going to call this ground 2. And its transform is going to be instead of x being 0, it's going to be x is 330. So it's going to abut the other one. Components should be the same. Let's see. The scroller, let's go ahead and rename that to 2 just so that we know that it's separate. Min position, reset position, that should all be the same, as are the messages. Okay. Now, for the duck, position and scale are going to stay the same. Our components are mostly going to be staying the same. In fact, it's actually going to, looks like everything here is going to stay the same as far as that goes. The duck collision, however, we're actually going to change this to a rectangle. And I'll go into that in a bit. But for now, I'll change width to 34. Height to 24. And we'll set an origin up. So x 0.5, y 0.5, just to center it, the same as what we're doing for the animated sprite. Okay, and our movement behavior, we're actually going to get rid of the keyboard movement because we don't want that anymore. And I believe everything else here can remain the same. So that, I know, was quite a lot, but that is pretty much going to be all of the changes that need to be made to the zone. At least for now. Hopefully I didn't mess any of that up, but I guess we'll find out. Alright, so the next thing, let's check out the player behavior, because there are quite a few changes to this. First thing is we need to add a flag as to whether or not we're playing, so we just want to call this _is playing. That's of type Boolean. And we actually want to default that to false, because we don't want to start off in a playing state. The next thing is we want initial position, which is a vector 3, and we're going to default that to vector 3.0. So we basically, we want to keep track of the initial position so that we can reset it later on. Okay, and one more thing I'm going to do, and this is more of a temporary measure, but this really ought to be something that's in the component's data. But for now, I'm going to create a string array called pipe names, and this is going to have the pipe names, the collision names for the pipes that we defined in configuration earlier. So we're going to say pipe 1 collision, and then end. And I'm actually just going to copy this. Okay, and change this to middle _ top. And we're going to call this at neg for the negative one. And finally, let's go ahead and set middle _ bottom. Okay, might help to put brackets around it. There we go. And I'm going to put a to-do on there. So the next thing we need to do is add a couple of message subscriptions. So I'm just going to make a copy of the mouse down one and change it to game_reset. And I'm going to make a copy of this one and say game_start. Alright, so the next thing I want to add is in update ready. We want to make sure that the animation is playing right away. So make sure the animation plays right away. So we want to say this.sprite.set frame 0. And this will fix that bug where the duck shows up with all of its frames on the screen. We technically probably shouldn't have to do this here. This probably ought to be moved, but for now, let's go ahead and fix it here. Next thing we need to do is store the initial position. So we'll say this.initial position. I spelled position wrong, didn't I? Let me change that. Okay, say this.initialPosition.copy from this.owner.transform.position. Right, just so we have a copy of that to be able to reset it later. Okay, so there's a couple of things happening here in this update loop that we don't necessarily want to happen or are happening incorrectly. First off, let's delete this block of code, because we actually do want to do some things in here even if we aren't alive. So let's remove that. And the next thing is this velocity should not always be added. It should only be done if we're actually playing the game. So if this.is playing, then we add to the velocity. The other thing here is, let me take a quick look at Sprite. Okay, so in animated sprite component, this should be a getter, and then is playing should not be a method call. Okay. So in onMessage, under the collision entry, we need to add an additional check. However, before we do that, this message.send, let's remove that from there and put it into die. So we'll send that out. Whenever the player dies, we'll send out this message that the player died. Okay, so back up here in onMessage rather, we'll say if this.pipe names, oops, that should be pipe names plural. Sorry about that. .index of, and we'll say data.a.name is not equal to -1, meaning if the name of this object is contained in our pipe names. And we'll also do the same check for b, data.b.name. So in other words, if either one of these are within the, if we've collided with a pipe, in other words, then we need to also call this.die. Okay, let's add a couple more cases here. So we'll say game reset, and in game reset, we'll just say this.reset, which of course we don't have yet, but we'll define that in a moment. And we'll add another case, game.start. And we'll call this.start, which also doesn't exist yet, but again, we'll add that in a moment. Okay. the next change is going to be in this private ShouldNotFlop method. We need to add one more check. So we need to return this dot is playing in front of that. So in other words, if we're not playing, then the wings should be flapping, and that'll become apparent as to why that is in a moment. Okay, so the next thing is in die, we want to check first if we're alive. So we want to say that this dot is alive. And the reason for this is so that we don't send this message out and play the sound multiple times if we hit more than one thing. We only want to send this once. Okay. So now we can create private reset return type void. And we're going to set this dot is alive equal to true. This dot is playing equals false. And then this dot sprite dot owner dot transform dot position dot copy from this dot initial position. So we're going to use that initial position to reset our player sprite. And then we're also going to reset the rotation. So this dot sprite dot owner dot transform dot rotation dot z equals 0. Okay. We're also going to set the velocity to 0. And we're going to set the acceleration to 0, 920. Okay, just to make sure that our acceleration is good. And then we're also going to say this .sprite.play. And that's it. That will reset the scene for us, for the most part. Okay, so we're missing one more thing, which is private start return type void. And we're going to say this is playing equals true. And then we're going to message.send, and we're going to say player underscore reset. Okay, and the sender is this. Okay, one last thing is within the on flap, we also need to add a check to say and this dot is playing, and then we play the flap animation. That's so that if we click the screen and we're not currently playing the game, we're not trying to flap the bird around. Basically takes the control away. Okay, so I think that is all we should actually need for the player behavior. So the next thing that we're actually going to need to do is we're going to need to set up our scroll behavior. So in behaviors, I'm going to add a new TypeScript file. We're going to call this scroll behavior, namespace TSE. Okay, export class, and we'll say scroll behavior data, and this implements my behavior data. So we need public name of type string, we need public velocity type vector2, and we're going to default that to vector2.0. And I'm going to do this a couple more times, so I'm just going to copy this property. And I'm going to put it down twice. So we're just going to rename this to min position and reset position. Okay. And then we need a public string, and we'll say start message, oops, string. Okay, and I'm going to paste that 2 more times. We'll rename that to stop message, and then reset message. Okay, and we need a public set from JSON, and JSON any return type void. So if JSON.name equals undefined, throw new error, name must be defined, and behavior data. Okay. Next we'll say this.name equals string JSON.name. Okay. Now we'll say if JSON.reset message is not equal to undefined, this.reset message equals string JSON.reset message. Okay, and I'm actually going to reuse this logic a couple times, so I'm going to paste it twice. And I'm going to say one for start message, one for stop message, and there we go. So now I need to do velocity, min position, and reset position. So if JSON dot, I'll start with velocity, and we'll say it's not equal to undefined. Else, we're actually going to throw an error if it's undefined, so we'll say throw new error, scroll behavior data requires property velocity to be defined. Okay, and I could say this dot velocity dot set from JSON, JSON.velocity. Okay, so I'm going to reuse this same logic 2 more times. So one for min position. Just going to update all these, and then once for reset position. And that should be it for the data. Okay. So the builder is actually going to be pretty straightforward. I'm actually going to steal the builder from the player behavior. And I'm just going to name it scroll behavior builder, scroll behavior data, and then scroll behavior. And then change this to scroll. And that should really be about it for that. So the next thing that we need to do is export class scroll behavior, extends base behavior, implements iMessageHandler, because we need it to listen to messages. Okay. So I'm actually going to take a copy of all these properties from the data, because most of them are going to be stored off here. I'm going to paste them, and I'm going to change them to private underscores. Name can go away. Let's see, velocity, min position, reset position, start, stop, reset, message. A couple more properties. Private is scrolling, which is a boolean, and that's going to default to false. And initial position, which is going to be a vector2, and that's going to be vector2.0 by default. Great. So the next is the constructor. And data, scroll behavior data, and we'll call super data. Okay, so now we can say this dot velocity, copy from data dot velocity, and this logic's going to be reused twice, so I'm going to paste it twice. Once for min position, and once for reset position. Okay, and then this dot start message equals data dot start message. Oops. And again, I'm just going to paste this twice. So stop message, and reset message. Reset message. That's it for the constructor. Pretty straightforward, honestly. So next we're going to go ahead and create the update ready. And in this we're actually going to store off a couple things and perform a few operations before we begin our update loop. So first, super.update ready. Okay, and we're going to say if this.start message is not equal to undefined. Then we're going to say that message.subscribe, and we're going to say this.start message this. And again, I'm going to repeat this logic twice, once for stop message, once for reset message. Just listen to those messages if it's configured to do so. So we're going to do the update next, and it's going to be time number, oops, turn type void. Okay, and we're going to say if this dot is scrolling, then this dot owner dot transform dot position dot add, and we'll say this dot velocity dot clone dot scale time divided by 1,000 dot to vector3. So basically what this is doing is it's taking the velocity and multiplying it by the milliseconds of the, or the seconds rather, of the frame time. So what we get here is milliseconds, we need seconds, and we just scale it by that, so that we get a nice fluid scroll as the game updates. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is if this dot owner transform position dot x is less than or equal to this dot min position dot x, and this dot owner dot transform dot position dot y is less than or equal to this dot min position dot y. So in other words, if our current position is less than our minimum position, then we need to go ahead and reset. So we're just going to call this that reset. which doesn't exist yet, but it will. So let's go ahead and implement onMessage. So public onMessage, message, message, turn type void. Okay, and we're going to say if message message.code equals this.start message. Then we're going to say this.isScrolling equals true. So we'll turn on the scrolling when we get the start message. Then we're going to say else if this message code is equal to stop message. Then we're going to say this.scrolling is false. Turn that off. And one more thing, if it's the reset message, then we're going to call this.initial, which also doesn't exist yet, but it will in a moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and create reset. So private reset, turn type void, and all this is going to do is this dot owner dot transform dot position dot copy from this dot initial position. So let's just reset it back to its initial position. Whoops, not initial position, sorry. Reset position, and then we'll say to vector3. Right, because reset is going to reset it to its reset position. And as you may have guessed, we need a private method called initial, turn type void, and it's going to be the same code almost, except it's going to be initial position that we set it to. And last but not least, let's go ahead and register this with the behavior manager. So we want to say register builder, and then new scroll behavior builder. Great. And that is actually all that is needed for the scroll behavior. So simply by attaching this behavior to that, we will actually get something that scrolls across the screen from right to left, and then once it gets past this edge of the screen, it snaps back over to its reset position. Misspelled that there. There we go. Okay. Okay. The next thing that we need to add is in the collision component. So let's have a look at collision component. And the data needs one more thing. So it's public, we'll call this static, and it's going to be a type boolean. And its default is going to be true. And what static means is it's basically an object that exists in the scene that doesn't move, and it should not be checking against other things for collision. So things can check against it for collision, but not the other way around. It's just sort of a performance gain that we get by doing less checks against everything in the scene. Okay. So in set from JSON, underneath the name, I'm actually just going to copy this block of code and change this to static, 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 and change this to boolean. Right, so if we define it, we can go ahead and override that default. Otherwise, it's just going to default to true. Which reminds me, I don't think we set static in our duck to false. So in our duck collision, static should be false. Sorry about that. Okay, now in the actual component, we add a, as you may have guessed, a private static boolean, and this dot static equals data dot static. Okay. And we'll also add an accessor for that. So public get is static turn type boolean turn this dot is this dot static. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I actually need to fix within this collision component that were bugs as far as how the actual collision was being created. So first thing, we're using local position here, which is actually wrong. So we're using the owner transform position, and what we should be using instead is the world position. So we're going to say this.owner.get world position, and we're going to change this one to get world position as well. And then these both should not be adding, they should be subtracting. So that was another bug there. Okay, and also we don't want to be printing out this update every frame, so I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. I want to leave it here for debugging purposes, but this is going to slow things down a lot if we do that every frame, so I'm just going to turn that off for now. So in the collision manager, we need to make a small tweak, and it's going to be around line 54, right around here. So right before this intersects check, we actually need to do a quick optimization. So we're going to say if both shapes are static, stop detection. So this is so that we don't collide our objects that are right next to each other with each other, because it doesn't make any sense to be doing that all the time. So if comp dot is static and other dot is that is static, we're just going to continue. Oops. Okay, that's it for that. Let's go ahead and close some of these. Okay, so under graphics, so under graphics sprite, we need to make a couple of properties be exposed here. So we have the width and the height, but we don't have getters for those. So let's see, right above, let's go ahead and set, right here. So public get width number, turn this dot width, and I'm going to do the same for height. Okay, and that'll come in handy later on. Okay, so next we need to actually open up Engine TS and go down here where we're loading our materials. And so far we just have grass and duck, and I'm actually going to paste in a few copies of grass just above here, and this is where we're going to load our other textures that we put into place. So under our assets textures, we're going to load this guy, and this guy. So the first one we'll just rename to BG, second one we'll name to end, and the third one we will rename to middle. And that should be it for the engine. Okay, so the next major fix comes in rectangle2d.ts. So first off, our origin should not default to 0.5. We actually want to default that to vector2.0. And that's because by default we don't need to center everything, and it makes things a whole lot more complicated if we do that. So let's just go ahead and simplify things and have it default to 0 for that. The next thing is this offset is actually negating these two, and that's not the case because we're subtracting them elsewhere. They should be positive, so let's get rid of those. Okay, and next in the intersects, I'm just going to actually simplify this bit of code here. So if the other is an instance of rectangle 2D, we're actually just going to return this check, which means that we can get rid of this block of code and just return that. Okay, and next, this point and shape is actually horribly wrong because this actually doesn't support negative or flipped collision or flipped shapes. So I'm actually going to remove that logic altogether because it's completely wrong. So what we need to do is we need to determine the minimum and maximum x and y values based on whether or not it's negative. And the way we do that is we say let x equal this dot width is less than 0. Then we'll say, so if this width is less than 0, then we'll say this dot position dot x minus this dot width to get that. Otherwise, we'll say this dot position dot x. Okay, and we're going to do the exact same thing for y. So we'll just change this to height, position y, height. There we go. Okay, now we're going to calculate the extents, which is going to be almost the same thing. So we're going to say let extent x equals this dot width. If it's less than 0, then we're going to say the extent is it's going to be this dot position dot x. Otherwise, it's going to be this dot position dot x plus width. Okay, and again, we're going to do the same thing for y, just using y and height properties instead. Okay, and now we can say if point.x is greater than or equal to x, and point.x is less than or equal to extent x. And then we're actually going to do the exact same thing for y, so we'll just copy this whole thing, say and, change this to y, y, and extent y. Okay, and then return true. And I could have just returned this right here, but for debugging purposes, it makes it a little easier to be able to set a breakpoint here. So I'm leaving it this way for now. As a future optimization, I might just say return here and remove this block of code. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that like that. Okay, so on SimObject, right above on added, I need to add public get world position, and it's going to return type vector 3, and we're just going to return new vector 3. It's going to be this dot world matrix dot data, and we want the 12th element of that matrix. Basically, we want the 12th, 13th, and 14th. So I'm just going to paste that in there, and so it pulls this positional data right out of the transformation matrix itself. Okay, and that should be everything that we need to do. So let's go ahead and build this and run it. And I may have to just refresh once. Oh, invalid JSON. Okay, position 133 unexpected token. Let me just change this real quick. Oh, it is set to JSON. What? Let me actually use a quick JSON validator. Line 8, position. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm missing, yeah, in background I'm missing the colon right there. Let me just check this one more time. Man, I missed another one. Line 25. See, folks, this is what happens when you type a little bit too fast. Okay. I think I've got all that fixed, so let me go ahead and stop this. Just rebuild one more time. Run. Probably gonna have to refresh. Okay. Why is that changed? Tint of undefined. Did I create a material for background? Oh, I did, but I messed something up here. Okay, so I changed all the asset names here, but I didn't actually change the names of the materials. Sorry about that. So let's build and rerun. Okay, Visual Studio decided it's going to mess up here. Let me try that one more time. Okay, so this is actually what I expected to see. So the game is not actually running, so nothing's moving. Clicking doesn't do anything, these pipes aren't moving yet. But what we should wind up with is when I send a message to, say, game start, this should kick off. So gravity kicks in, I can flap around, and I can die and fall through here because for some reason the ground is messed up. So let me just have a quick look at that. I have a feeling the reset position on the ground is wrong. Oh, this should be 458. That's probably why. Which makes me think that this one here is probably also wrong. This should be 458 for the min position. Let's give that a shot. Okay, So I'll just say TSE message send, game start. Now it looks correct. So now we can just keep going until we hit something, and then what we can actually do, before we would have had to refresh sort of to reset the game. But now, if we die, we can call TSE message send game reset. Whoa, that's wrong. What the heck? That is definitely a problem with configuration, I think. Oh, I never set the... Okay, that's the bug. I never actually updated this initial position. So we actually need to say this.initial position, within update ready, of course, dot copy from this.owner dot transform dot position. Let's build that. Okay. And let's go ahead and send a message to start. Okay, we've died. Let's reset. And there we are. Now we can start again. Perfect. Okay, so as you can see, these two messages that we're sending here, if you might imagine, well, those will probably be hooked into UI events. But in order to do that, we need to create a quick little UI system so that when we click a control on the screen, we actually are able to send those messages at the appropriate time. But that is outside the scope of this video, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this one short here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think. Let me know if any of you guys have built it up to this point. I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. I will catch you guys next time. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and see you later.